I would now request Rajen Mathews, who has been introduced already by Ramesh. So I will not take more time in introducing him. He's a well-known figure. I request Rajen Mathews, who has been a part of the HLF member for the 5G, along with Devotee, to talk for the next 5 minutes, and then we'll open up for other panelists also.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. What I'd like to do is just focus on the policy and the regulatory side of what we're talking about, 5G, IoT, M2M. Just recently, there was a high-level forum that talked about implementing 5G and getting India ready for the adoption and rollout of 5G. Dr. Paul Raj was here to begin that process. So I just want to highlight what the policy and regulatory framework that's required to go forward and some of the challenges there. The first few points I'd like to make that comes from what Dr. Rao highlighted is that when you look at 5G, truly it's the first time that we can talk about convergence. We've been talking about convergence, but now when you talk about 5G, you are truly seeing the convergence of multiple industries around one common platform, which is obviously the 5G network platform that will, we expect, over the next several years become increasingly ubiquitous. Again, Dr. Rao mentioned what are the principal areas of why 5G is becoming such a hot topic, because we are really seeing quantum leaps in terms of efficiency, speed, adaptability, cost. So when you look at the three fundamental issues, we talk about the density, the densification of networks, which is supported by 5G, the low latency, the higher speeds, and the reliability factor. No longer are we talking about 4 nines, 99.99. We are talking about 7 nines in terms of reliability in order to support some of the high-end applications. So that being said, I just want to highlight 3 particular areas in terms of policy and regulation that are important. 1, spectrum. 2, right-of-way. And 3, affordability and financial necessity. So let me start with spectrum. I think the high-level forum has identified the 3.2 to the 3.6 gigahertz spectrum band, as well as the 26 to the 34 gigahertz spectrum band as the bands that we will need to harmonize internationally for the rollout of 5G. When you look at the 3.2 gigahertz to 3.4 gigahertz, we have somewhere in the vicinity about 400 megahertz of spectrum available. When you go to the 26 to the 34 megahertz, what we call the millimeter wave spectrum, we have over 14,000 megahertz of spectrum available. So you can see the quantum of spectrum that's available. Now, one of the problems that we have in India is the price that operators are required to pay for spectrum. If you look at the most recent regulatory recommendation for the pricing, the reserve price of 3.2 to 3.6 megahertz of spectrum, it was 492 crore rupees for 1 megahertz. Now, if you multiply that by 1 megahertz of spectrum, pan-India, just 1 megahertz of spectrum, at that price, pan-India, it's over 9,000 crore rupees. When you're looking at 5G, the minimum base quantum of spectrum is at least 25 megahertz of contiguous spectrum, and TRAI itself has said operators ought to be encouraged to acquire 100 megahertz of contiguous spectrum. When you go into the millimeter wave range, you're talking about 400 to 600 megahertz of spectrum per operator in order to be able to make some of these things we're talking about a reality. So the first point I'd like to highlight is that unless we come up with a different pricing paradigm and we continue to adopt our present pricing paradigm,
we are not going to be, from an operator perspective, get to the spectrum and invest in the spectrum. The money is simply not there. Now, the second point I want to highlight is the right of way. I just want to highlight what has been happening in BBMC just recently. Just recently, you've been seeing headlines of where BBMC has been cutting our fiber, right, for various and sundry reasons. I won't get into a reason. We have got to come up, and Karnataka is one of the states which still has not adopted the central gazetted notification guidelines on right of way. So in terms of cell tower locations, the cost of those, the process required for the laying of fiber, be it ducts, overhead, is all still very much up in the air, no pun intended. So we have got to finalize a statewide ROW policy that makes the rollout of our networks. We talk about highly densified networks coming down to street level. None of that is going to be able to happen if the right-of-way issue is not going to be adjusted. And finally, what we call the affordability factor, both for citizens as well as for the industry. The industry today has 7.5 lakh crores of debt. Indian banks have stopped lending to the industry. The government has says this is principally a private originated issue in terms of attracting funds. So most of these funds are going to have to come from abroad, which means that the financial health of the industry has got to be addressed. Today, except for one operator, there is no operator that is making a profit. The Honorable DOT Secretary herself has said that if you want to implement the 5G policy going forward, you will need over the next 5 years $100 billion US. And again, if you want to attract that type of money for the rollout of these 5G networks, it has got to depend on getting the industry out of the present situation. Why is it that we go back to the government? We go back to the government because today 30% and more of every rupee earned by an operator goes back to the government as some type of tax or levy. So these are the things we've highlighted as issues that need to be addressed if 5G is going to be a reality in India. Thank you.